Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. So, did you know that English literature is basically just a centuries-long soap opera full of dramatic rebellions and radical shifts? Seriously, it's not just a collection of dusty old books. It is this ongoing, incredibly passionate conversation where every single generation either fiercely builds on the ideas of the last one or just completely tears them down. Whether you're a lifelong bookworm or a focused learner who's just eager to connect to historical dots, this energetic, chronological journey is perfectly designed for you. We are going to break down centuries of unbelievable writing, extract the absolute essentials, and uncover the fascinating drama that actually shaped the stories we still read today. All right, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll start with the foundations of English poetry, move right into the massive epics and the neoclassical age, then explore satire and the first novels. After that, we'll dive into the raw emotion of the Romantic Rebellion, and finally wrap things up with manners and Gothic romance. To really wrap our heads around all of this, let's establish a mental map of our historical timeline. We're setting the stage by marching from the late 16th century, the golden Elizabethan Age with the frilly collars and royal courts, straight through the highly structured wigs and powder era of the early 18th century neoclassical age. From there, we hit the emotional, nature-driven rebellion of the late 18th century Romantic Age. And finally, we arrive right amidst the smoky factories and super polite drawing rooms of the 19th century Victorian Age. Keep this progression in the back of your mind, okay? It is literally the key to understanding why these famous authors wrote the way they did. The world was changing at a breakneck pace, and their words were a direct reaction to it. Okay, moving right into Section 1, Foundations of English Poetry. Or, as I like to think of it, the birth of a literary language. Before we get to the heavy hitters of the later centuries, I want to set up a fun piece of trivia for you. It's this foundational mystery that pretty much shaped everything that followed. So here's a question directly for you. Who is known as the father of English poetry? Got a guess? If you guessed Geoffrey Chaucer, you absolutely nailed it. But why does he get that incredibly grand title? Well, back in Chaucer's day, if you were educated or part of the elite, you didn't read or write anything important in English. No way. You used French or you used Latin. English was considered the language of the common, everyday people, definitely not high art. But Chaucer completely flipped the script. He wrote his absolute masterpiece, The Canterbury Tales, in Middle English. He practically established English as a respected literature language single-handedly by telling these vibrant, hilarious, and deeply human stories about everyday pilgrims. A super easy way to remember his impact is just linking his initials. Chaucer equals the chief poet of early English. Let's fast forward just a bit to the Elizabethan Age, running from roughly 1558 to 1603. Now, we usually know this as Shakespeare's Golden Age, right? But it was also the playground of a writer known as the poet's poet, Edmund Spenser. Spenser wrote this incredibly famous allegorical epic called The Faerie Queene. And if you're wondering, an allegorical epic is basically a massive fantasy story where the knights, the dragons, and the magical castles actually secretly represent real-life political figures, religious battles, and virtues. Spenser wasn't just writing fantasy for the fun of it. He was using this highly complex narrative as a sharp political tool to celebrate Queen Elizabeth I and to champion Protestant values. And that grand storytelling takes us right into Section 2, Epics and the Neoclassical Age, an era totally defined by order, reason, and grandeur. So that creative explosion of the Elizabethan Renaissance eventually shifted into these massive formal epics. And John Milton's absolute masterpiece, Paradise Lost, is the ultimate example. We are talking about a monumental epic poem dealing with literally nothing less than the fall of man and Satan's cosmic rebellion against heaven. It is incredibly heavy, awe-inspiring literature. But what makes this even more mind-blowing is the context of how it was created. John Milton was completely blind when he composed this massive, intricately structured poem. He actually had to dictate the entire cosmic rebellion out loud to his daughters and assistants. To lock this towering achievement into your memory, just flip the title. Lost Paradise equals Milton's masterpiece. Now, following that sweeping, intense period, literature took a really sharp pivot right into the neoclassical age. And this new era was completely obsessed with reason, order, balance, and some extremely sharp satire. You might be wondering why the sudden shift. Well, society had just survived a brutal, exhausting period of civil wars and political chaos. People were just done with the drama. They desperately wanted stability, logic, and structure. And their literature perfectly reflected that. Chaotic emotions? Out. Mathematical precision and logic? Back in. The absolute heavyweights of this orderly movement were writers like John Dryden, Alexander Pope, and Jonathan Swift. They used their wit and intense intellect to navigate this brand new, highly structured society. That whole obsession with logic and sharp social critique brings us neatly to Section 3, Satire and First Novels, marking the super exciting birth of prose fiction. You see, that neoclassical focus on reason and dissecting human behavior actually paved the way for a brand new literary format, the novel itself. Honestly, you'd be surprised by how recent the concept of the novel actually is in the grand scheme of human history. So let me challenge you with another crucial milestone question to keep things interesting. Who actually wrote the very first English novel? The widely accepted answer here is Daniel Defoe, and the pivotal year was 1719. That specific date marks the publication of Robinson Crusoe. Think about why this was so exceptionally groundbreaking. Up until this point, massive epics were all about kings, queens, angels, and demons. But Defoe, he wrote a gritty, detailed, realistic survival story about one completely ordinary guy stranded on an island. It was a massive shift toward individualism in storytelling. A really great way to remember this literary milestone is to just connect the character straight to the author. Crusoe equals Defoe's island hero. Let's contrast Defoe's huge milestone with another giant of the era, just to see how incredibly diverse prose was starting to become. On one hand, we have Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, which is the ultimate individual survival narrative. But on the exact opposite side of the spectrum, we have Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. Now today, Gulliver's Travels is often totally mistaken for a whimsical children's story about a guy meeting tiny people. But when it was actually published, it was a highly dangerous, biting, satirical masterpiece criticizing politics, society, and literally the darkest parts of human nature. Swift was using humor to absolutely dismantle the fabric of society. To keep these two straight in your head, just remember, Crusoe survives on an island, but Gulliver travels with Swift to critique humanity itself. But human beings aren't just logical machines, are we? We crave feeling. Which brings us to Section 4, the Romantic Rebellion, where emotion takes over. We are doing a total 180 here. The next generation of writers looked at the strict, cold, mathematical rules of the neoclassical period and just passionately rebelled against them. The neoclassical age was all about reason, order, and balance. But Romanticism, they threw that completely out the window in favor of spontaneity, imagination, emotion, and a really deep spiritual reverence for nature. And the main catalyst for this dramatic rebellion was the Industrial Revolution. As cities started filling up with thick smog, deafening machines, and crowded factories, these writers desperately fled back to nature and raw human emotion to find some kind of meaning. A super easy way to anchor this shift is this. R stands for Romanticism, which equals reason rejected. So who exactly were the generals leading this emotional rebellion? Well, we've got William Wordsworth, S.T. Coleridge, P.B. Shelley, John Keats, and Lord Byron. And let me tell you, these weren't just guys sitting quietly at desks. They were essentially the rebellious rock stars of their day. Lord Byron, for instance, lived this incredibly wild, highly scandalous international life that completely embodied this total rejection of societal rules. They lived out loud, boldly championing individual freedom, dramatic love, and the unpredictable power of the natural world over any kind of rigid structure. Actually, let's take a quick, fascinating philosophical pivot here, just to clarify a really common point of confusion when looking at these movements. It's super easy to get movements like Romanticism, realism, and naturalism mixed up on exams, but they are fundamentally complete opposites. While realism focuses purely on capturing everyday life exactly as it is, naturalism takes it a step further into something pretty cold. Its core emphasis is on scientific determinism. That's the idea that our biology, our genetics, and our harsh environment completely dictate our fate, leaving pretty much zero room for free will. It is clinical, it is scientific, and it is the exact opposite of spontaneous, hopeful, romantic emotion. So keep that straight. That fascinating clash of ideas drops us right into our fifth and final section, manners and Gothic romance, as we explore the 19th century masterpieces. As we step right into the 19th century, Victorian era, we start to see the novel evolve into two brilliantly distinct, immensely powerful branches. On one side, we have Jane Austen, the absolute master of the novel of manners. Through works like Pride and Prejudice, she offered incredibly sharp, witty, and realistic observations of marriage, class hierarchy, and those super rigid social rules. Then, on the totally opposite side, we have Emily Brontë. Her only novel, Wuthering Heights, is this stormy, dark masterpiece of Gothic romantic fiction. So Austen is analyzing the subtle cruelties of the polite drawing room, while Brontë is unleashing the wild, untamed passions of the moors. And what makes this even more remarkable is how radical it was that these two distinct, world-changing genres were being pioneered and perfected by female authors during a highly restrictive era for women. Now, a really fun way I like to keep these two distinctly brilliant authors straight in my head revolves around the overall atmosphere of their work. For the witty social critiques set in large estates and fancy ballrooms, think Pride equals Prejudice equals Jane Austen. But for the moody, stormy, deeply emotional Gothic romance set out in the harsh countryside, think Wuthering Winds equals Emily Brontë. It's a really simple association, but trust me, it is absolutely foolproof for recalling their unique, world-building vibes on test day. Wow, we have covered an absolutely amazing stretch of literary history today. Looking back at the timeline, it is just incredible to see the distinct through line connecting all these different voices. From Chaucer boldly finding the voice of the everyday people, to Milton dictating grand cosmic epics in the dark, to an exhausted society demanding order from writers like Swift, all the way to the rebellious, untamed emotion of the Romantics and the profound psychological depths explored by Austen and Brontë. The summary we've got here captures all those essential links, mapping out a journey where every single word written was a direct reaction to the world happening right around the author. We've seen firsthand how the history of English literature is basically an endless, fascinating cycle of reaction and rebellion. The strictness of the neoclassical era birthed the wildness of the Romantics, just as those grand old epics gave way to grounded individual novels. And so, I want to conclude this explainer by leaving you with a really provocative question to ponder. If Romanticism completely rejected reason, what do you think the next great literary rebellion will reject as we move past the Victorian era into the modern world? The cycle always continues and the conversation is never truly finished. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer and keep exploring those fascinating stories.